Hey guys, welcome to tonight's journey. We are starting all the way back at the very beginning, tracing the story of human evolution from the first sparks of life to the world we know today. Before we dive in, take a second to hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy these kinds of deep dives into history and humanity. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Where are you watching from? And what time is it right now? It's always amazing to see how far this little community reaches across the world. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights, maybe grab a blanket, and let's step together into the very origins of us. The earth turns in silence. Oceans rise and fall. Mountains lift and crumble, and storms sweep across endless skies. For billions of years, this world existed without human voices. There were no footsteps, no words, only the rhythm of nature shaping itself through time. Long before humans appeared, other rulers walked the land. Dinosaurs, immense and powerful, filled the earth with their presence for over 150 million years. But their reign ended in fire. An asteroid struck the planet, the skies darkened, and the giants disappeared. In their absence, life found new paths. Small mammals, once hiding in shadows, began to thrive. Among them were tiny primates, soft-furred and sharp-eyed, moving swiftly among the trees. They were not yet human, but in their curious eyes and clever hands, the beginnings of our story had already taken root. For millions of years, these primates lived in forests, leaping through branches, reaching for fruit, watching always for predators. Their world was one of green shadows and quiet danger. Day after day, they survived. And all the while, evolution worked silently, shaping them, preparing them for something more. The earth itself began to change. Forests shrank. Wide grasslands spread across Africa. The shelter of trees grew scarce, and life in the open became necessary. In this new world, some of our ancestors did something remarkable. They stood upright. They rose onto two legs and began to walk. It was a small change, but it opened an entirely new way of living. Walking on two legs freed the hands. Hands that could carry food. Hands that could hold infants. Hands that would one day shape tools and ideas. Standing tall allowed them to see across the savannah, to spot danger, to follow herds, to find safety. 4 million years ago, in volcanic ash in Tanzania, they left behind footprints. Those footprints are still with us today, preserved in stone. Not just the prints of a lone wanderer, but several, walking together. Already humanity was more than survival. It was companionship. It was community. But to walk upright was also to be exposed. The savannah was home to lions, leopards, saber-toothed cats. Alone, our ancestors were vulnerable. They had no sharp claws, no great strength. Their safety was in one another. In groups, they shared food. They protected their young. They watched the horizon together. From this, the first bonds of culture and society began to grow. Time passed and new abilities emerged. Among the most important was the discovery of fire. Whether taken from a lightning strike or coaxed into life by hand, fire was more than warmth. It was safety in the darkness. It cooked food, releasing more energy, energy that fueled the growth of the human brain. Around the fire, they gathered together. They shared comfort. They shared silence, perhaps even the first unspoken stories. With fire and with tools, they began to move beyond their home. Step by step, they spread outward. Across mountains and rivers, across deserts and coasts, they walked. Out of Africa, into Asia and Europe, they carried with them the slow but steady rhythm of survival. And there, in distant lands, they found others. The earth was not empty. Neanderthals lived in Europe, sturdy and skilled in the cold. Denisovans lived in Asia, their traces now found only in bone and in our DNA. For a time, Many kinds of humans shared this world. Sometimes they fought, sometimes they lived side by side, and sometimes they became one. Within us today are fragments of these ancient cousins, woven quietly into our blood. From all these branches, one would endure. Homo sapiens, our kind. Curious, restless, creative. They painted on cave walls, carved into stone, and shaped the first symbols of art. They sang, they dreamed, they imagined. Their bodies were fragile, but their minds reached beyond survival. From simple tools to firelight, from footprints in ash to journeys across continents, this is the path that led to us. Not a straight line, but a long, winding story. A story of adaptation and resilience. A story of families moving together, of dangers faced and overcome, of ideas kindled like sparks. It begins in forests, where small primates clung to branches. It moves into savannas, where figures stood upright and gazed across the horizon. It glows in the fires that kept them warm at night. It continues in footsteps, in bones, in memory, and it carries forward all the way to the present moment. The same journey, still unfolding. The world was changing. The endless forests that had sheltered our ancestors for so long began to thin. Climate shifted, rainfall lessened. Where there had once been endless green, now stretched open savannas of golden grass. The canopy that had once offered safety grew scarce, and the old ways of life in the trees could no longer be enough. It was here, in this new landscape, that a remarkable transformation took place. A group of our distant ancestors began to something no creature had done quite like them before. They stood upright. They balanced on two legs, leaving their hands free. At first it may have been awkward, perhaps only a few steps at a time, the rest of the body still clumsy, still adjusting to this new posture. But slowly, over countless generations, walking upright became the way of life. And with it, the path toward humanity truly began. Standing tall gave a new perspective. From the ground, they could see further across the plains. They could spot predators in the distance, follow herds of animals, or find sources of water. Two legs also meant traveling longer distances, conserving energy where four legs would have tired. But perhaps the most important gift of walking upright was what it left behind. Two free hands. Hands that once only clung to branches were now free to carry food, to cradle children, to shape the first tools. These hands would one day build civilizations, paint masterpieces, and reach into space. But here, in the African savanna, they were simply hands of survival. 4 million years ago, the story of these upright walkers was captured in stone. In a place called Litoli in Tanzania, volcanic ash fell soft across the ground. A small group of our ancestors walked across it, pressing their feet into the earth. The ash hardened, and their steps were preserved for eternity. To this day, we can still see their footprints, small, human-like, moving together across the land. A family perhaps, or companions, journeying side by side. Their destination is unknown, but their presence remains. Those footprints whisper of something more than survival. They tell us of belonging, of togetherness. Even then, humanity was not a story of isolation, but of community. Still, life on the savannah was dangerous. Predators roamed the grasses. Lions, leopards, saber-toothed cats, hyenas. Our ancestors had no sharp claws, no heavy armor, no great speed to outmatch them. Their bodies were fragile. Their strength was in numbers. Together, they watched the horizon, shared food, defended one another. Cooperation became survival, and survival became the root of society. The brain, though still small compared to ours, began to grow, with more energy unlocked from new diets, roots, tubers, scavenged meat. They slowly became more capable of problem solving, of planning, of imagining possibilities beyond the moment. Each generation carried this forward, tiny steps in a vast journey that none could have foreseen. The savannah was not only a place of danger, but also of opportunity. With hands free, these early ancestors began to experiment with stones and sticks. A broken rock could scrape meat from bone. A sharp edge could cut plants or dig roots. These simple tools, rough and unshaped, were the beginnings of technology. They were not yet the makers of fire, nor the builders of shelters, but they were learning to shape the world around them. Picture them at dusk, as the sky glows red and orange above the grasses. A small group gathers near a cluster of trees. The young cling to their mothers, the adults scan the distance for danger. They huddle close, sharing food gathered during the day. The night air grows cool and shadows stretch long across the plains. There is no fire yet, only the comfort of togetherness. Yet in their eyes is something new, awareness, curiosity, a spark of what will one day become imagination. From these first steps, humanity's story begins to accelerate. Walking upright was not just a way of moving, it was a doorway into possibility. With vision sharper, with hands freed, with brains slowly growing, our ancestors had the tools to face a changing world. And though they could not know it, those quiet steps across the savannah were the first steps toward everything we are today. The journey from forest to grassland was not quick. It unfolded over millions of years, across countless generations. But little by little, the shape of our future was being written. Standing tall, walking upright, sharing food, watching over one another, these simple acts became the foundation of what it meant to be human. We look back now at the fossils and the footprints, at the bones buried in ancient soil, and we see not just creatures of the past, but the beginnings of ourselves. They did not think of the future. They did not know they were part of a story. But we carry their choices, their adaptations, their survival in every step we take today. From the safety of trees to the open risk of the savannah, our ancestors took their first steps toward humanity. They walked into danger, into uncertainty, into possibility, and from their journey, our story unfolds. The story of hands that would shape tools, of minds that would grow restless, of a species that would change the world. It all began with a step. The forests that had sheltered life for millions of years were beginning to change. Climate shifted, rainfall lessened, and the once dense canopy of green slowly gave way to patches of open grassland. For countless generations, our primate ancestors had thrived in the safety of the trees, their days defined by climbing, leaping, and foraging among branches. But the world was no longer the same. The trees were thinning, and food was harder to find. Those who stayed behind clung to what little forest remained. Others, however, faced the uncertainty of the savannah. Among them were the Australopithecines, small in size yet extraordinary in what they would accomplish, for they were the first of our kind to rise and walk upon two legs. They were not large creatures, these early ancestors. A fully grown Australopithecus might stand barely a meter tall, weighing no more than a child today. Their arms remained long and curved, their fingers still well suited for gripping branches, but their hips and spine told a new story. Unlike their tree-bound cousins, their bodies had shifted to balance on 2 feet. It was not yet the graceful stride of modern humans, but a careful, steady movement that freed their hands from the constant work of climbing. And in that simple act of standing upright, the path toward humanity opened wide before them. The savannah was a place of danger and possibility. To walk upright meant seeing further across the golden grasses, spotting predators before they struck, and tracking herds of animals on the move. It meant traveling longer distances under the hot sun, conserving energy where four-legged movement would have been exhausting, But perhaps the greatest gift of this posture was freedom. Two hands no longer bound to the earth or to branches. They could be used to carry food back to the group, to hold infants close during long journeys, to experiment with sticks or stones. In time, these hands would shape tools, carve symbols, and write the story of civilization. But here, at the dawn of their journey, they were simply hands of survival. We know they walked together because of the footprints they left behind. Over 3.5 million years ago, in a place we now call Lake Toli in Tanzania, a volcanic eruption blanketed the land with soft ash. A small group of Australopithecines passed across this surface, their bare feet pressing gently into the earth. Soon after, the ash hardened, preserving their steps for eternity. Those footprints remain to this day, silent but powerful witnesses to a turning point in history. Side by side they walked, perhaps a family, perhaps companions, leaving behind not just prints in the ground but evidence of the moment humanity began to rise. Though they stood tall, they had not fully left the forest behind. Their bodies carried reminders of their origins: long arms for climbing, curved hands for grasping. They were as comfortable pulling themselves into trees as they were walking across open plains. Their lives balanced between two worlds, moving from branches to grass, adapting to whichever environment offered the best chance of survival. Their diet reflected this same flexibility. They cracked open nuts with strong jaws, chewed fibrous roots dug from the ground, gathered fruits when they could, and scavenged the remains of animals left behind by predators. Life was not easy, but adaptability kept them alive. That gift, to change, to shift, to make do with what the earth provided, would one day become humanity's greatest strength. Their minds, too, were beginning to change. Their brains were larger than those of their primate cousins, not yet human in scale, but already stretching toward new possibilities. They could remember where food was plentiful, recall which paths led to water, and sense where predators lurked unseen in the grass. Knowledge was passed silently through action and imitation, a mother showing a child which roots to dig, or a group moving together toward safety at the faintest sign of danger. No spoken words yet, but the first threads of memory, learning, and teaching were already being woven into the fabric of their lives. Social bonds were their strength. Australopithecus did not live alone, but in groups bound by care and protection. They groomed one another, shared what they gathered, and kept watch for threats together. In these small bands, we glimpse the roots of what would become human society. The instinct to belong, to protect, to comfort one another in moments of fear was as essential as food or water. Without those bonds, survival on the open plains would have been impossible. Picture them at dusk, as the setting sun turned the sky into shades of red and gold. A small group gathered near a stand of trees, the adults keeping close while the young clung to their mothers. The air cooled, shadows stretched long, and the savanna filled with the sounds of night. There was no fire yet to chase away the darkness, only the warmth of bodies pressed together and the safety of many eyes scanning the horizon. In those quiet moments, huddled in the fading light, they endured another day, unaware that their simple presence was shaping the course of the future. The remains of one of these ancestors, discovered in 1974 in Ethiopia, gave us a face to their story. She was called Lucy, a female Australopithecus who lived over 3 million years ago. Her bones revealed hips designed for walking, knees that locked into place, and feet made to carry her upright. She was small, fragile even, yet her body carried the blueprint of humanity. In her steps we see our own. Every child today who takes their first unsteady steps echoes Lucy's journey, repeating an act that began in the deep past of Africa's plains. Australopithecus would not be the final form. They were a chapter in the long book of evolution, a bridge between the safety of trees and the boldness of the savanna. Over time, New species would emerge with larger brains, stronger bodies, and more skillful hands. But without these early walkers, without their courage to rise, the story of humanity could not have unfolded. They did not know they were shaping the destiny of their descendants. For them, life was only about survival, searching for food, keeping watch for danger, finding safety in numbers. Yet in those quiet, instinctive choices lay the beginning of something greater. They rose because they had to. They endured because they must. And from their struggle came a gift that would outlast them all. The first steps of Australopithecus were small, almost ordinary, but they echoed through time, reaching across millions of years to touch us now. They carried us out of the forests, across the plains, and into the unknown future. They gave us upright posture, freed our hands, and planted the seeds of community. Every stride we take today carries their memory, every step a continuation of the path they began. The journey of humanity started with them, tiny figures walking upright under the wide African sky, their footprints pressed into volcanic ash, their eyes scanning a vast and dangerous world. They could not know it, but in rising from the ground, they had set in motion a story that would one day encompass the entire earth. We are their children, and in every movement we make, we carry their legacy forward. The first walkers had opened a new path. Australopithecus had risen from the forest floor, their small bodies balancing on 2 feet as they gazed across the savannas of Africa. They had carried us out of the trees and into the open plains, and in their unsteady steps lay the beginnings of all that would follow. But standing tall was only the beginning. To truly thrive, survival would demand something more. The world was full of challenges, dangerous predators, scarce resources, and climates that shifted from plenty to famine. Walking upright freed their hands, and now, at last, a new kind of ancestor would begin to use them in ways no creature had done before. Enter Homo habilis, the handyman. Emerging around 2.5 million years ago, they were small, still not much larger than Australopithecus, but with one great difference. Their minds were growing, their curiosity expanding, and their hands were becoming tools of invention. Where earlier ancestors had only carried and grasped, Homo habilis began to shape. They took stones in their hands and struck them against one another, chipping away sharp flakes. A simple action, but revolutionary. For the first time, the natural world was no longer accepted as it was. It was altered, reshaped, transformed into something new. A sharp-edged stone could scrape the flesh from a carcass left behind by lions, allowing them to gather precious meat and marrow. It could split plants, dig roots, or cut fibers. These tools were crude, rough, little more than jagged rocks. But in those edges gleamed the first sparks of technology. For the first time, survival was not only about body and instinct, it was about invention. Their brains were larger than those of Australopithecus, their skulls showing room for more thought, more problem-solving. They learned that stones could be shaped, and that the shaped stones could be used again and again. The knowledge spread from one to another, perhaps silently, perhaps through gestures and calls, until the making of tools became a shared skill. Each generation built upon the one before, carrying forward this fragile but powerful discovery. Picture a scene on the African plains 2 million years ago. The sun beats down, the grasses ripple in the wind, and a group of Homo habilis gather around the remains of an animal brought down by predators. The hunters are gone, the vultures circle above, and the scavengers close in. But these ancestors hold in their hands chipped stones, sharp and ready. They move quickly, cutting flesh from bone, prying open the marrow-rich interior, taking what they can before hyenas arrive. They eat, they share, they survive. The tools have given them access to food that their teeth and jaws alone could never manage. And with that food, rich in fat and protein, Their brains begin to grow even larger. This moment marked a turning point in our story. With tools, our ancestors stepped into a new relationship with the world. They were no longer passive creatures, bound to eat only what their bodies could handle. They had extended themselves, creating new abilities beyond flesh and bone. A stone in the hand became an extension of the body, sharper than teeth, harder than nails, more enduring than bone. And from that moment forward, humanity would never again be defined by body alone. We became the species of tools, and in that, the species of possibility. Their lives were still difficult. They lived short spans, often no more than 30 years. Predators still stalked them, diseases weakened them, hunger shadowed their days. But in the chipped stone there was hope, a weapon against hunger, a defense against fear. Slowly, cautiously, Homo habilis learned to rely on what they could make. Each flake of stone carried the memory of thought. Each tool was proof that they had begun to imagine a future beyond the moment. At dusk, imagine them again, gathered in small groups beneath the fading light. There is no fire yet to warm the night, but there are stones, carefully shaped and held with pride. Perhaps one individual sits apart, striking rock against rock, listening to the sharp crack as a fragment falls away. Others watch, curious, learning. The sound becomes familiar. The skill spreads. The night grows dark, but in their hands lies something brighter than flame, the spark of invention. Homo habilis walked where Australopithecus had once walked, but they carried more with them. They carried the beginnings of memory, of tradition, of knowledge passed down. In their small minds flickered the earliest signs of imagination. The ability to look at a stone and see not just a stone, but a tool, a possibility, a future. They could not know that this was the beginning of a long chain, that one day their descendants would shape spears and bows, wheels and plows, engines and computers. To them, it was only survival. But to us, looking back, it was the first chapter of invention. The age of tools had begun, and with it, the age of intelligence. Homo habilis may not have spoken in words as we do, may not have drawn symbols or carved images, but they carried the seed of all those things. Their hands and their minds, working together, had crossed a threshold no other species had crossed before. And so, as we look to them now, across the vast distance of time, we see not just primitive beings, chipping stones in the dust. We see ourselves at the beginning of our journey. The first inventors, the first makers, the first to look at the raw world and shape it to their will. Their lives were fragile, their days uncertain, but in their hands lay the future of humanity. From Homo habilis, the handyman, we inherit more than bones and blood. We inherit curiosity. We inherit the restless urge to shape, to change, to create. The chipped stone was not just a tool, it was a promise that humanity would forever be more than what nature alone had given us. That with our minds in our hands, we would reach beyond the limits of the body, and in doing so, we would transform the world. And so the story continues. From the first upright walkers to the first tool makers, from the small fragile bodies of the past to the restless inventors of the future. Each step builds upon the last, each discovery paving the way for what comes next. Walking upright freed the hands shaped stone. And soon, those stones would be shaped into something even greater. For from fire, yet to come, would rise the true power of humankind. The chipped stones of Homo habilis had opened a doorway into possibility. For the first time, our ancestors were no longer bound by the limits of their bodies. With tools, they carved, cut, and scavenged. With tools, they survived where others could not. But even with sharp stones in hand, the nights remained long and dangerous. When the sun dipped below the horizon, and shadows stretched across the grasslands. Predators prowled the darkness. The roars of lions and the calls of hyenas echoed through the air, and our fragile ancestors huddled together in fear. They had hands to shape, brains to imagine, but something was still missing. A force greater than teeth or claws. Something that could push back the night itself. That force was fire. It was Homo erectus, appearing nearly 2 million years ago, who would become the first true masters of flame. They were taller and stronger than their predecessors, their bodies built for endurance, with longer legs and shorter arms that gave them a more human stride. Their brains had grown larger still, allowing for more complex thought and planning. They roamed widely, leaving Africa and spreading into Asia and Europe. And wherever they went, they carried with them one of the most powerful discoveries in the history of life on Earth. At first, fire must have been a mystery, a terrifying spectacle when lightning struck the ground and set the grasses ablaze, or when molten rock spilled from the mouth of a volcano. Many creatures fled from it, but Homo erectus lingered, watching, learning. Slowly they began to see fire not as an enemy but as an ally. A glowing branch carried from a wildfire could be preserved, tended carefully, kept alive. They learned to guard it, to feed it with wood, to shelter it from rain. Fire was no longer just a wild force of nature. It was something they could hold in their hands, something that answered to their care. The gifts of fire were endless. At night, flames lit the darkness, their glow keeping predators at bay. The great cats that once prowled close now stayed at a distance, eyes gleaming from the shadows but unwilling to cross the circle of light. Around the fire, our ancestors were safer, braver, freer than they had ever been before. But fire was more than protection. It was warmth on cold nights, allowing Homo erectus to travel further into new lands, enduring climates that would have killed their ancestors. It was light in the darkness, extending the day, creating hours for gathering, talking, and sharing beyond the setting sun. And most of all, it was food transformed. Raw flesh and roots had sustained those before them, but cooking changed everything. Fire softened tough roots and plants, made meat easier to chew, released more nutrients, and killed dangerous parasites. For the first time, food became safer, richer, more nourishing. And with this steady, powerful source of energy, the human brain could grow larger still. In the glow of those ancient flames, intelligence itself was being fed. Picture them gathered at dusk, a small band of Homo erectus huddled around a fire they had kept burning since the last lightning storm. The flames crackle, sending sparks into the night sky. The air is filled with the scent of roasting meat, the warmth of fire chasing away the evening chill. Children press close to their parents, watching wide-eyed as the adults feed sticks into the flames. The darkness beyond is vast, full of unseen dangers, but within the circle of firelight there is comfort. There is belonging. There is survival. And something else happened around the fire. Something quiet, something subtle, but profoundly important. Here, in the glow of shared flames, the first true gatherings began. The fire became a center, a place to return to, a place to linger. It drew the group together, not only for safety, but for connection. Around the fire, the seeds of culture were sown. Gestures and sounds took on new meaning in the dancing light. Faces were illuminated, expressions seen more clearly, emotions shared. The night, once a time only of fear, became a time of togetherness. Over thousands of generations, fire became not just a tool but a companion. It shaped their lives, their movements, their possibilities. With fire, Homo erectus could travel farther, eat better, grow stronger, and think deeper. The flames became part of who they were, passed down from one group to another, carried across continents like a sacred treasure. It is difficult to overstate the power of this moment in our story. Fire was not simply survival, it was transformation. It altered the body by fueling the brain. It altered society by bringing people together. And it altered destiny by giving humanity control over one of nature's greatest forces. We were no longer at the mercy of the night. We had taken light for ourselves. Homo erectus lived for nearly 2 million years, longer than any other human species to ever exist. Through their endurance, their strength, and above all, their mastery of fire, they carried humanity's story forward. Without them, we would not be here. Every hearth, every lamp, every candle and glowing screen traces its lineage back to those first fires tended by careful hands in the deep past. And so, as you imagine their lives, think of the firelight flickering across their faces. Think of the warmth that kept them alive, the glow that brought them together, the flames that transformed raw survival into the beginnings of culture. They may not have known it, but in those crackling embers lay the foundation of everything to come. For with fire, humanity had gained not just a tool, but a symbol of life, of knowledge, of endurance. The story of fire is the story of us. From the chipped stones of Homo habilis to the glowing flames of Homo erectus, the path of intelligence was unfolding. And soon those flames would guide us out of Africa, across the world, toward new lands, new challenges, and new encounters with others like us. The journey was only beginning, but the night was no longer so dark. The firelight glowed against their faces, chasing away the night. Around it, Homo erectus gathered, warming their hands, roasting their food, and keeping the darkness at bay. But the flames did more than ward off predators. They lit the path ahead. With fire at their side, they could push further than any ancestors before them. And so began one of the greatest journeys in history, the first migrations out of Africa. For millions of years, Africa had been the cradle of our story, the place where our earliest ancestors rose to their feet, shaped their first tools, and discovered the power of flame. But the world beyond Africa was vast, full of uncharted lands, unknown dangers, and untapped opportunities. Slowly, over thousands of generations, groups of Homo erectus began to move. They followed the rhythms of the earth, the migrations of animals, the shift of the seasons, the search for water and shelter. Step by step, they ventured outward, leaving behind familiar valleys and grasslands to explore horizons they had never seen. The journey was not a single event, not one great march, but a long unfolding of movement across deep time. Some bands wandered northward, skirting the edges of the Red Sea and into the Arabian Peninsula. Others crossed into the Middle East, where open plains gave way to hills and forests. Over thousands of years, their footprints spread farther still, reaching into Europe and deep into Asia. Fossils tell us they lived in what is now China and Indonesia, enduring climates and landscapes unimaginably different from the warm cradle of Africa. This was no small feat. Leaving Africa meant adapting to new challenges at every step. The animals were unfamiliar, the plants unknown, the weather harsh and often unforgiving. Yet fire warmed them, tools served them, and their growing intelligence carried them through. Their bodies, taller and more robust than earlier ancestors, were built for endurance. They could walk long distances, hunt with persistence, and survive where others might falter. Slowly, carefully, they spread across continents, becoming the first true citizens of the world. Imagine them on the move, small bands traveling together, children carried on shoulders, tools and food tucked into simple bundles. They walked along river valleys, across dry plains, into mountain passes. Each day brought uncertainty, yet also discovery. The smell of new earth, the sound of strange birds, the glint of rivers they had never seen. The fire they carried, carefully tended, became more than survival. It was home itself, a glowing reminder of where they had come from, a promise that even in strange lands, they could endure. With each step, they wove a thread that bound humanity not to one place, but to the whole world. Where once we had been creatures of a single region, tied to a single cradle, now we were wanderers, explorers by necessity. The urge to move, to discover, to push beyond the horizon was written into our story here, at this moment, when Homo erectus first left Africa. That restlessness, that curiosity, still lingers in us today. Over time, Homo erectus adapted to the regions they settled. In colder climates, they learned to use fire not only for cooking but for warmth, cloaking themselves in the skins of animals. In forests, they shaped tools to cut wood and carve shelters. In open plains, they honed the skill of persistence hunting, chasing animals until exhaustion brought them down. Wherever they went, they did not simply endure, they transformed, bending their surroundings to their will with fire, stone, and ingenuity. Their migrations took hundreds of thousands of years. Generations lived and died along the way, never knowing how far their descendants would go. But slowly, step by step, their reach grew. From Africa into Eurasia, from warm tropics into temperate forests, across deserts and mountains. In the bones and stones they left behind, we can trace their journey, a trail of existence stretching across continents. It is humbling to imagine these were not great civilizations or mighty armies. They were small families, fragile groups, clinging to survival one day at a time. Yet in their persistence, they reshaped the destiny of our kind. They proved that humanity was not bound to one land, not confined by borders of geography or climate. We were a species of movement, of expansion, of possibility. Around the campfires of Asia, the voices of Homo erectus echoed in the night. In the forests of Europe, their tools chipped against stone. On the islands of Indonesia, they stood against the surf and watched the endless sea. Each scene a new chapter in the same unfolding story. The story of humanity carried outward, beyond Africa, toward every corner of the earth. And though they could not know it, their journeys laid the foundation for those who would follow. Later species, Neanderthals, Denisovans, and eventually Homo sapiens, would continue what they had begun. But it was Homo erectus who first proved it could be done. They were the pioneers, the trailblazers of humanity's greatest migration. As we look back across the vastness of time, it is easy to see the path as inevitable, to imagine that humanity was always destined to cover the globe. But for those first travelers, it was anything but certain. Each step carried risk, each journey faced unknowns. Yet they walked, they endured, they spread. And because of them, the human story became a global one. So, when you picture the out-of-Africa migrations, imagine not armies or grand expeditions, but small flickering bands of wanderers, their fires glowing in the dark, their footsteps pressing into new soil. Imagine the courage it took to leave the only world they knew, to walk into landscapes they could not understand, and to survive against all odds. In those footsteps, the rhythm of our species began, the rhythm of movement, of expansion, of seeking what lies beyond the horizon. From the heart of Africa, across continents and through centuries, Homo erectus carried the flame of humanity outward. They were not yet us, but they were our bridge to the wider world. And in their quiet migrations, they gave us our greatest inheritance, the earth itself, open to human possibility. For countless generations, Homo erectus carried the flame of humanity across the world. Their tools, their fire, their migrations laid the groundwork for all who would follow. Yet time is long, And the story of our kind is not a straight line. We were never alone on this journey. Across the shifting landscapes of ice and forest, of plains and mountains, other human species arose, cousins to us, kin yet different, each carving their own path through the ages. Among the most well-known of these were the Neanderthals. Stocky and powerful, they thrived in the colder climates of Europe and Western Asia. Their bodies were built for endurance in icy winds, with wide noses to warm the air they breathed and strong limbs to endure the hunt. They were not brutish savages, as once imagined, but skilled survivors. They crafted finely made tools, hunted large game with courage, and may even have cared for their sick and elderly. In the caves they called home, they left behind traces of art and ritual, pigments smeared on stone, carvings etched into bone, and graves that suggest they honored their dead. To the east lived another cousin, the Denisovans, whose existence we only uncovered in recent years from fragments of bone and strands of DNA. Though we know little of their faces or their ways, their legacy lives on in us. In the genes of people across Asia and Oceania, Denisovans still whisper through time, their blood mingled with ours. And then, in Africa, another species was rising, one that looked more like us than any who had come before. Homo sapiens, with slender frames and rounded skulls, with minds capable of new levels of creativity and imagination, they began to spread just as their ancestors had done. And in their journeys they met their cousins, Neanderthals in Europe, Denisovans in Asia. These meetings were not just encounters of competition, they were also encounters of connection. For thousands of years, multiple human species walked the earth together. Imagine it, a world not of one humanity, but of many. In the valleys of Europe, Neanderthals huddled in caves as the snow fell heavy outside, while far away in Africa, early Homo sapiens painted symbols and carved tools of bone. In the mountains of Siberia, Denisovans roamed forests that today we barely imagine. They were not creatures apart from us, but variations of the same great family, different branches of a tree, each growing in its own direction. And when these branches touched, something remarkable happened. They did not only compete, they intertwined. Fossil and genetic evidence tells us that when Homo sapiens and Neanderthals met, they shared more than conflict. They shared blood. Children were born of these unions, carrying the features and genes of both. The same happened with Denisovans. And so, within us today, hidden deep in our DNA, lie echoes of these ancient cousins. In the skin, the hair, the immune systems of modern people, Neanderthal and Denisovan legacies endure. We carry their story within our very bodies. Yet these encounters were not always peaceful. There was competition for land, for food, for survival itself. Climate shifted, resources dwindled, and the balance of life grew fragile. For reasons still debated, one by one, the other species faded away. The Denisovans vanished into obscurity, known to us only through fragments. The Neanderthals held on the longest, enduring ice ages and hardship, but eventually, too, their fires went out. Around 40,000 years ago, the last of them disappeared. The caves that once rang with their voices fell silent, their tools left behind, their memory carried only in us. But to see them as failures would be wrong. Neanderthals lived for hundreds of thousands of years, far longer than modern civilization has yet endured. They were masters of their world, and in their strength and endurance lies a story of success. Their extinction was not a collapse of weakness, but the turn of history, a shifting of chance and time. And though their bodies vanished, their presence remains, folded into our genes, reminding us that we are not alone, that we never were. So when we speak of humanity today, of one species standing alone on the earth, we should remember it was not always so. Once we were many. Once we shared the world with those who were not us, but not entirely other. They laughed, they loved, they struggled, and they dreamed, just as we do. Their hands struck tools from stone, their fires burned in the night, their children cried and grew. They were human in their own ways, and they deserve a place in our memory. Picture for a moment the last meeting of cousins, perhaps a small band of Homo sapiens wandering into a valley where Neanderthals still lived. They regard each other across the firelight, different faces, different forms, yet both carrying the spark of humanity. Did they fear each other? Did they share food? Did they speak in sounds we cannot know of the lives they lived? We will never be certain. But we know this. Their worlds touched, their blood mingled, and in us today, they endure. The age of many humans gave way, slowly, to the age of one. By 40,000 years ago, Homo sapiens stood alone, the last surviving branch of a once crowded tree. But our solitude is not emptiness. In our blood and bones we carry the memory of those who walked beside us. Neanderthals, Denisovans, and other cousins now lost. Their stories live in us, their gifts carried forward into the future. And so, as the last fires of our cousins flickered out, a new fire was rising. Homo sapiens were beginning to spread across the earth with a force unlike anything before. With creativity, with imagination, with the power to tell stories and dream of worlds unseen, they would shape not only their own destiny, but the destiny of the planet itself. The time of many had ended. The time of one had begun. The last fires of our cousins had gone out. Neanderthals and Denisovans slipped quietly into the past, leaving Homo sapiens as the sole inheritors of a long and tangled family tree. Yet survival alone was not enough for us. Across the wide world, our species carried within it something new. Not only sharper tools, not only clever hunting, but imagination. The ability to dream, to envision what was not present, to give shape to thought in marks, symbols, and stories. With this gift, humanity began to create not only tools of survival, but expressions of the soul. Deep within caves, by the flicker of firelight, the first great art of our species appeared. Tens of thousands of years ago, people pressed pigments of red and black against stone walls, tracing the forms of bison, horses, mammoths, and deer. In places like Lascaux in France and Altamira in Spain, their visions still wait for us in the darkness. Lines of animals leaping, herds running, hands stenciled against the rock as though saying, "We were here." These images were not random. They were chosen, repeated, meaningful. They spoke of what mattered most: the hunt, the animals that gave life, the connection between humans and the living world. Imagine the scene. A small band enters a cave, torches casting shadows on the walls. The air is cool, the stone damp beneath their hands. One among them grinds ochre, mixing it with fat, pressing color onto a brush of reed or fur. Slowly, carefully, they trace the outline of a great bison. The others watch in silence, their breath hushed, as if witnessing something sacred. When the torchlight flickers across the finished shape, it seems to move, alive in the dancing light. For a moment, the boundary between stone and spirit blurs. These were not only pictures, they were beginnings of story, of ritual, perhaps even of belief. To paint the animal may have been to honor it, to call it spirit, to ensure the success of the hunt. The handprints pressed against the walls may have been signatures, or prayers, or simply the joy of leaving a mark. Whatever their purpose, they show us this: Homo sapiens were no longer only surviving, they were imagining. They were reaching beyond the material world into the unseen. And art was not limited to walls. Across continents, our ancestors carved small figurines, animals, humans, sometimes exaggerated shapes of fertility and life. The Venus figurines of Europe, with their rounded forms, may have represented the power of birth, the mystery of creation. Tiny beads and ornaments, strung together, reveal a love of decoration, of identity, of beauty. Even the dead were not forgotten. Graves were filled with tools, ornaments, and offerings, suggesting that people believed life continued beyond death. Here we glimpse the birth of spirit, the dawning of religion, of wonder, of questions larger than the world around them. Who are we? Where do we go when we die? What lies beyond the stars, beyond the horizon, beyond the life we know? Around fires and in caves, humanity began to tell stories, to weave myths, to imagine powers greater than themselves. The gods of later civilizations were not yet born, but the seeds of faith were already there, carried in whispers and painted in ochre. Art and spirit were inseparable from survival. These early expressions gave meaning to life's hardships, helped bind communities together, and created shared identity. The act of painting, carving, or burying the dead was more than ritual. It was connection. Connection to each other, to ancestors, to the animals that gave them life, to forces beyond their understanding. In this way, humanity found a deeper kind of survival, not only in the body, but in the mind, in the heart, in the soul. Picture them again. Night outside, stars wheeling overhead. The group gathered around a fire at the mouth of a cave. Children listen wide-eyed as an elder points to the painted walls and begins to tell a story. The animals come alive in words. The mighty bison, the swift horse, the eternal hunt. The children drift towards sleep, the fire crackles, and the story flows on, carrying memory forward. This was the beginning of culture, the weaving of shared imagination that would one day grow into epics, religions, and civilizations. From those painted caves to the temples of Egypt, from carved figurines to towering cathedrals, the thread of art and spirit has never broken. It began here, in the hands of early Homo sapiens who dared to shape more than tools, who dared to paint what they dreamed. In their colors and carvings, we see ourselves, the need to express, to belong, to believe. And so the story of humanity began to shift once again, from mere survival to meaning, from instinct to imagination. The animals on the cave walls still leap as they did thousands of years ago, still whisper to us in the darkness. We were here, and we dreamed. In the caves where paintings glowed by torchlight, in the gatherings where stories were shared, something deeper was taking shape. A new kind of connection. Our ancestors had always communicated, even long before Homo sapiens. Gestures and calls had guided the hunt, warned of danger, and soothed the cries of children. A pointed finger could signal where to look. A raised hand could stop the group in its tracks. A cry of alarm could send everyone running. But these were fragments, scattered signals in the vast silence of thought. Homo sapiens carried within them the gift to go further. Slowly, across tens of thousands of years, communication began to take shape not just as sound, but as structure. Not only cries and gestures, but patterns of meaning. From the throat and tongue, new sounds emerged. From the mind, those sounds became symbols. And from symbols, they grew into words. Imagine the earliest moments of this shift. A mother calls to her child, not only with tone but with a sound that repeats, always the same, always connected to the child's presence. A hunter mimics the sound of running hooves to speak of bison. A gesture is paired with a sound, and over time the sound alone is enough. Bit by bit, a web of meaning forms, simple but powerful. What once required pointing or pantomime could now be carried in the air, invisible yet lasting, a sound that lived in memory, a word. The power of words was immense. Suddenly, thoughts could leap from one mind to another with clarity. The hunt could be planned not just in the moment, but in advance. Stories could recall not only what was seen, but what was imagined. Knowledge could be passed down not through trial and error, but through teaching. Around the fire, words turned experience into tradition, memory into myth. Language did more than transmit information. It wove people together. It created shared worlds. With words, we could describe not only what was, but what could be. We could dream aloud, hope aloud, fear aloud. We could bind groups together through promises, rules, and beliefs. Words became the threads of culture, the invisible fabric that held communities close. Picture a group at dusk. The hunt has ended. The fire burns low. Children sit in a circle as an elder begins to speak. At first, the words are simple. Sounds for animals, for places, for the cycle of day and night. But soon, the elder weaves them together into something more, a story. Perhaps of the hunt that succeeded, perhaps of ancestors long gone, perhaps of spirits unseen in the darkness. The children listen, their imaginations stirred. In the flicker of firelight, words carry them beyond the cave, beyond the present, into realms of memory and dream. The birth of language changed everything. It allowed cooperation on scales never seen before. Hunts became coordinated, villages organized, relationships strengthened, knowledge accumulated like never before, preserved not only in artifacts, but in spoken tradition. The memory of one generation could become the wisdom of the next, carried not in bones or tools, but in words. And as language grew, so did thought itself. To speak is to structure the mind. With words we learn to name the world, to divide and categorize, to imagine and combine. The ability to describe gave rise to the ability to reflect, to question, to wonder. Language was not only a tool of communication, but a mirror of the mind, shaping how we see, how we feel, how we understand our place in the universe. Over tens of thousands of years, languages multiplied and diverged. Different groups carried different words, different rhythms, different patterns of thought. What began as small sounds grew into vast systems, each with its own beauty, its own poetry, its own way of capturing the human spirit. The voices of our ancestors became the symphony of humanity, countless tongues, countless songs, all rooted in the same ancient need to share, to connect, to belong. And so, language gave birth to culture, to history, to the possibility of memory beyond the limits of a single life. Through words, humans could imagine gods and tell myths, create laws and pass down traditions, sing songs and whisper dreams. The cave paintings and carvings were visions made visible. Language made visions shareable. Together they formed the twin pillars of what it meant to be human: art and word, spirit and speech. Think for a moment of how powerful this was. A cry can warn of danger, but a word can describe what kind of danger, where it lurks, how it may be faced. A gesture can signal food, but a word can tell the story of where to find it, when it ripens, how it should be prepared. A sound can comfort a child, but words can shape a lullaby, a song of peace carried across generations. We often imagine the invention of fire or tools as humanity's greatest leap. But in truth, language was perhaps our most transformative creation. It gave us the ability not only to survive, but to remember, to imagine, to hope, to dream together. It allowed us to build worlds not from stone or wood, but from ideas, invisible yet enduring. And so, the world of silence gave way to the world of voices, from gestures to sounds, from sounds to words, from words to stories. Humanity had discovered its most powerful gift, a gift that still shapes us, still carries us, still whispers through every conversation, every song, every prayer, every poem. The birth of language was the birth of us, not only as creatures of flesh and bone, but as beings of thought and imagination. And from these first words would grow everything we know: culture, history, science, art, faith, and the endless stories we still tell today. For countless generations, our ancestors had wandered. They followed rivers and herds, gathered fruits and roots, and lived by the rhythm of the seasons. They spoke in stories, painted in caves, and sang beneath the stars. Yet always life was uncertain. The hunt might fail, the weather might turn. A year of scarcity could bring hunger and loss. But then, in scattered valleys and fertile plains, something began to change. The earth itself, long the source of unpredictable fortune, became something humanity could shape. Instead of only gathering what grew wild, people began to notice the plants around them. Which seeds sprouted easily, which fruits returned if their pits were scattered, which grains could be stored for seasons yet to come. Slowly, almost quietly, humans learned the most powerful secret of all: how to grow food. The first fields were small, fragile experiments. A handful of wheat near the rivers of the Middle East, barley bending in the wind, lentils and peas clustered near the hearth. In East Asia, rice sprouted in the wet lowlands, nourished by the summer rains. In the Americas, maize and beans began their long journey toward cultivation. Across different corners of the world, humans discovered farming not once, but many times, as though the earth itself had whispered the idea to those ready to hear it. With farming came animals. At first, people hunted them, as always. But over time, they noticed which creatures could live close, which were gentle, which could provide more than meat. The dog was first, padding at the edge of firelight, sharing in scraps, guarding camps. Later came sheep, with wool to clothe and milk to drink. Goats and pigs followed, then cattle, steady and strong. Horses, when finally tamed, would change the world. These animals were no longer only prey. They became companions, helpers, partners in survival. The shift was monumental. For the first time, humans could settle. A seed planted one season promised food the next. A herd tended through the winter promised strength in the spring. Villages appeared, clusters of huts near rivers, surrounded by fields and pastures. The wandering life gave way to roots in the earth. But this new life was not without cost. Farming demanded labor, patience, and constant care. Where hunting and gathering had left stretches of leisure, fields demanded weeding, watering, harvesting. Herds required protection, feeding, shelter. The diet, once varied with berries, nuts, and wild meats, narrowed to grains and bread. And as people gathered in one place, new challenges arose. Disease spread more easily, disputes over land and water grew sharper, and wealth and power began to divide communities. Yet the benefits outweighed the burdens. Farming allowed families to grow larger, food to be stored, children to survive where once they might not. Populations increased, villages expanded, and soon the seeds of civilization itself were sown. The agricultural revolution was not only a change of food, but a change of life. It altered how humans saw time, how they measured the year by planting and harvest. It altered how they saw the land, no longer as a path to wander, but as soil to tend. It altered how they saw themselves, not as wanderers at the mercy of nature, but as shapers of nature, caretakers and cultivators. Imagine a village at dawn. The mist hangs low over the fields, dew shining on the stalks of wheat. Children carry baskets, gathering grains under the watchful eyes of parents. A shepherd guides a flock toward the hills. Smoke rises from hearths where bread bakes for the day's meal. There is a rhythm here, a pattern of life tied to the earth itself. The people are no longer only surviving day to day. They are building futures, planning seasons ahead, rooting themselves in time. And as villages grew, so did connection. Families linked into clans, clans into tribes, tribes into the beginnings of communities that would one day become towns and cities. Farming and animals gave humanity the chance not just to live, but to flourish, to multiply, to imagine more than the next meal. This was the true dawn of human history. From farming flowed surplus food, from surplus flowed trade, from trade came wealth, and with wealth came leaders, builders, and dreamers. Farming, simple as it seemed, was the spark that lit the path toward civilizations of stone and bronze, of temples and palaces, of kingdoms and empires. But for now, in this early moment, it was still simple. It was the sound of seeds falling into soil, the bleat of sheep in the morning, the creak of wooden tools shaping furrows, the laughter of children chasing one another between rows of grain. Humanity had taken its first steps toward mastery of the land. The agricultural revolution had begun, and with it the world was forever changed. From hunters and gatherers to farmers and herders, our ancestors had crossed a threshold no species had crossed before. They were no longer only part of nature's cycle. They had learned to guide it, to bend it, to grow with it. And though challenges and burdens lay ahead, one truth was now clear. Humanity was no longer wandering. Humanity had learned to stay. The seeds had been planted, the animals tamed. Farming had taken hold, and with it came a slow but irreversible transformation. Humanity was no longer bound to the endless wandering of their ancestors. The land, once a temporary stop, was now a place to return to, season after season. The rhythm of planting and harvest called people to stay, and in staying, they began to build something new. Homes, villages, and communities. The first settlements were small, fragile clusters of huts made from mud, reeds, and wood. They rose near rivers, where soil was rich and water flowed freely. In the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates, small farming communities grew where fields of wheat and barley swayed in the breeze. In the Nile Valley, huts clustered along the life-giving river. In the Indus and Yellow River basins, settlements blossomed in fertile plains. Across the world, wherever farming spread, people began to build places meant not just for passing through, but for living in. Imagine such a village. A circle of homes with smoke curling upward from hearth fires. Children run through narrow paths, chasing each other with laughter. The air is filled with the scent of bread baking, of grain drying in the sun, of animals bleating nearby. At dawn, men and women step into the fields with tools of wood and stone, tending the crops. At dusk, the village gathers near a central fire, sharing food, stories, and songs. Life is simple, but it is stable, and that stability is something humanity had never known before. With stability came abundance. Farming created surpluses, baskets of grain that could be stored through the winter, jars of dried fruit, herds of animals fattened for later. For the first time, food was not only for today, but for tomorrow, and the tomorrow after that. These surpluses gave people the freedom to imagine beyond survival. Some villagers became skilled potters, shaping clay into jars and bowls. Others became tool makers, carving sharper blades from stone or experimenting with early copper. The community began to specialize, each person contributing in new and different ways. And with surpluses came exchange. Villages did not live in isolation. Along riverbanks and pathways they met with other groups. Grain might be traded for obsidian, wool for salt, pottery for shells. Slowly, networks of trade began to spread, linking communities together. These were the first threads of economy, the first steps toward the vast webs of exchange that would one day span continents. But life in villages was more than work and trade. It was the birth of belonging. No longer scattered families drifting across landscapes. People now lived side by side, sharing walls, sharing fields, sharing stories. Disputes surely arose, but so too did cooperation. To build irrigation canals or harvest fields required hands working together. Rituals and gatherings began to bind communities, shared meals and ceremonies, reinforcing the sense of we. For the first time, humans were not only surviving as individuals or families, but thriving as societies. In places like Çatalhöyük in modern-day Turkey, one of the earliest known towns, thousands of people lived together in tightly packed homes. They climbed into their dwellings through rooftops, cooked in communal hearths, and decorated walls with paintings of bulls and hunters. In Jericho, stone walls rose to protect grain stores, hinting at the growing need to defend abundance. These early villages and proto-cities revealed that even in their simplicity, humanity was already dreaming of permanence, of safety, of community larger than the family alone. Settlements also changed how people experienced time. Nomads once lived in constant movement, measuring life by migrations of herds and ripening of fruit. But villagers marked the seasons with planting and harvest, with festivals of growth and renewal. The Earth's cycle became their calendar. Births, marriages, and deaths unfolded not in fleeting camps, but in places where memory was anchored, where ancestors were buried beneath homes, where stories lingered in the walls of familiar huts. For the first time, a sense of place joined the human spirit. Yet permanence also brought new challenges. Surpluses attracted envy. Villages needed protection from outsiders. Disputes over land or water could no longer be avoided by simply moving on. Leaders began to emerge, those who could mediate, organize, or defend. Rules, customs, and traditions formed, shaping the first outlines of governance. Religion, too, began to settle. Shrines and sacred spaces appeared within villages where offerings were made to gods of fertility, harvest, and protection. The first settlements were not yet the bustling cities of later ages, but they were their foundation. Here, humanity learned what it meant to live in community, to plan, to build, to defend, to share. The walls of villages enclosed more than homes. They enclosed ideas, dreams, and the beginnings of history. Imagine night falling on one of these ancient settlements. The fields lie quiet, the animals are sheltered, and the people gather by firelight. The smell of cooked grain lingers in the air. The voices of children fade into sleep. Elders tell stories of ancestors, of gods, of the mysteries of the earth. Above, the stars shine over rooftops that will not move, over hearths that will not die with the next migration. For the first time in the long journey of humanity, there is permanence. There is home. And from these humble beginnings, the world would change. Villages would grow into towns, towns into cities, cities into civilizations. But here, in these first settlements, we see the spark, the moment when humanity rooted itself in the soil, gathered in community, and began to shape the destiny that would carry us into history. From the quiet clusters of villages, humanity's roots deepened into the soil. Seasons of planting and harvest gave way to generations, and generations gave rise to something larger than anyone could have imagined. Villages swelled into towns, and towns into cities, until across the great river valleys of the earth, the first civilizations began to shine like stars on the map of history. It was in these fertile basins that civilization found its earliest homes. Between the Tigris and Euphrates, in the land we call Mesopotamia, cities like Ur and Babylon rose from mud, brick, and clay. Along the Nile, Egypt blossomed, its villages bound together by the river's eternal flood. Far to the east, in the valleys of the Indus River, cities like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa spread their gridded streets and mysterious seals. And in China, the Yellow River cradled early dynasties, where rice and millet fields stretched as far as the eye could see. Each of these civilizations shared a common truth. Together, humans could achieve far more than they ever could alone. With farming came surpluses, and with surpluses came trade, wealth, and the power to support specialists, builders, priests, artisans, scribes. Suddenly, life was not only about survival, it was about creation, innovation, and the weaving of cultures vast and complex. In Mesopotamia, people raised ziggurats, stepped temples reaching toward the sky. Priests and kings ruled side by side, organizing labor, storing grain, commanding armies. Along the Nile, Egypt built wonders that would last for millennia. The pyramids, rising from the desert, were not merely tombs, but symbols of a people united under powerful pharaohs who were seen as gods upon the earth. In the Indus Valley, cities were carefully planned, with straight streets, advanced drainage systems, and public baths, signs of a society both orderly and ingenious. In China, dynasties formed, their rulers claiming the mandate of heaven, their people inventing silk, pottery, and bronze rituals to honor ancestors. One of the greatest inventions of these early civilizations was writing. The marks first carved into clay tablets, etched into stone, or painted onto papyrus transformed memory into permanence. In Mesopotamia, cuneiform captured the records of trade and stories of gods. In Egypt, hieroglyphs told tales of pharaohs, prayers, and the journey of the soul after death. In the Indus Valley, mysterious symbols still resist our understanding, whispering secrets we have not yet unlocked. And in China, early characters carved into oracle bones gave rise to a script that would echo down the ages. Writing was more than record-keeping. It was the dawn of history. For the first time, human voices could outlast human lives. Laws could be written and upheld. Knowledge could be preserved and taught. Myths could be shared not only through speech, but through texts, allowing ideas to travel far beyond the storyteller's breath. With writing came governance. Kings and councils set down rules to keep order among growing populations. In Babylon, the Code of Hammurabi declared justice in stone, with laws to govern trade, family, and punishment. Egypt's pharaohs organized vast networks of labor to build monuments and canals. In the Indus Valley, civic order was maintained through careful city planning. In China, rulers blended politics with spirituality, ruling not only as leaders but as keepers of cosmic harmony. Civilization also brought art, music, and philosophy. Temples rose high, decorated with carvings of gods and spirits. Songs and poems celebrated the cycles of the seasons, the love of family, the awe of the heavens. Statues were carved, jewelry forged, and tools shaped with new precision. People began to ask questions not only of survival, but of meaning, about justice, destiny, the stars above, and the life beyond death. But along with greatness came challenges. Cities drew strength from their size, yet also vulnerability. Surpluses made them targets for invasion. Walls had to be built, armies trained, weapons forged. Disease could spread more easily among crowded streets. Inequality deepened, with rulers and elites commanding wealth while farmers and laborers toiled for survival. Still, the momentum of civilization carried forward, reshaping humanity's destiny with every stone laid and every word inscribed. Picture one of these ancient cities at dawn. The market is waking, stalls being prepared with jars of grain, baskets of fruit, clay pots, woven cloth. Scribes sit nearby with tablets, ready to record transactions. Priests ascend temple steps, offering prayers to the rising sun. Children run through narrow streets, while animals bray in courtyards. In the distance, workers labor at great constructions, walls, canals, monuments that seem to touch the sky. There is order, there is purpose, there is permanence. These civilizations were not isolated sparks, but the beginning of a chain reaction. Their ideas, inventions, and achievements spread outward, influencing others, inspiring rivals, setting the stage for the empires and philosophies yet to come. From the clay of Mesopotamia to the stones of Egypt, from the bricks of the Indus to the bronze of China, the blueprint of human society was being written. Civilization was not only about survival, it was about legacy. The ziggurats, pyramids, temples, and walls were not only structures but symbols of belief, of power, of humanity's unyielding desire to shape the world and leave something lasting behind. And though centuries would pass, though civilizations would rise and fall, the foundations they laid would echo through history. For in these river valleys, humanity stepped into a new age. An age of writing and laws, of kings and farmers, of temples and markets. An age where the human story was no longer scattered, but recorded, remembered, and built into stone. The rise of civilizations was the rise of history itself, and with it, the long journey of humanity marched forward, carrying us ever closer to the world we know today. The great river valleys had given rise to civilizations, and in their temples and markets, humanity's first experiments with permanence had taken root. But history is never still. Each new discovery reshapes the world, and the next great transformation came not from rivers or crops, but from fire and stone. It was the age of metal, the age when human hands learned to bend the earth itself into tools, weapons, and empires. The story began with bronze. Early people found that when copper was mixed with tin, a new substance emerged, harder, sharper, more durable than stone. Bronze tools cut deeper into wood, tilled fields more efficiently, and carved symbols into tablets with precision. Bronze weapons, axes, daggers, and spears, glimmered with an edge that could decide the fate of battles. For the first time, metal became the key to power, and those who controlled it controlled the future. In Mesopotamia, bronze was forged into the weapons of kings and soldiers, arming the great city-states for conquest and defense. In Egypt, artisans shaped bronze into ornaments and tools, while pharaohs commanded armies wielding bronze-tipped spears. Across the Aegean, the Minoans and Mycenaeans rose with bronze ships and swords, sailing the seas to trade and to fight. Bronze was more than a tool. It was a ticket to dominance, and it spread across continents through networks of trade and war. Yet bronze carried a weakness. It relied on tin, a rare resource scattered across distant lands. As demand grew, so too did the struggle to control its supply. Trade routes stretched wider, linking far-off peoples in the pursuit of metal. Empires rose not only on the strength of their armies, but on their ability to gather resources, protect caravans, and maintain networks of exchange. Then came iron. At first, it seemed less valuable, a common metal difficult to smelt, brittle if handled poorly. But once the secret of forging strong iron was mastered, everything changed. Unlike tin, iron was everywhere, in hills, in valleys, in mountains across the world. No longer did kingdoms need distant trade to supply their armies. Iron was stronger than bronze, harder, sharper, and more abundant. It placed power in the hands of those who could wield it. The Iron Age was the age of empires. Armies armed with iron weapons swept across lands, carving kingdoms and dynasties that would last for centuries. In the Near East, the Hittites were among the first to unlock the secrets of iron, their warriors carrying blades that shattered bronze defenses. The Assyrians built empires on iron chariots and disciplined armies, expanding across Mesopotamia with relentless force. In India, iron tools cleared dense forests, opening land for farming and supporting great kingdoms. In China, iron plows revolutionized agriculture, feeding vast populations and strengthening dynasties. Metal did more than change war. It changed society. Iron plows and sickles transformed farming, allowing more food to be grown, feeding larger cities and supporting ever greater populations. Metal coins appeared, replacing barter with currency, smoothing the flow of trade. Blacksmiths and metal workers became vital members of communities, their forges glowing at the heart of villages and towns. And as empires rose, so did ambition. Kings and rulers built armies not only to defend, but to expand, to conquer, to unify vast regions under their banners. The Persian Empire stretched across continents, linking east and west with roads and couriers. In China, the Zhou dynasty laid foundations of philosophy and order, even as iron spread through their fields and armies. In the Mediterranean, city-states like Athens and Sparta prepared for their own destinies, forging identities through iron, trade, and the pursuit of glory. Yet empire came with cost. Armies marched, but they left destruction in their wake. Cities grew wealthy, but wealth deepened inequality. Slavery expanded, with prisoners of war forced to labor in fields, mines, and households. The brilliance of empire often rested on the suffering of the many, and still, humanity moved forward, driven by the fire of invention and the hunger for power. Picture an ancient forge, the heart of this transformation. A blacksmith bends over glowing coals, hammer striking rhythmically on hot iron. Sparks scatter into the darkness as the shape of a blade emerges. Around him, villagers gather, some waiting for tools to work their fields, others for weapons to defend their homes. The sound of hammer on metal is the sound of a new age, an age that will echo in every empire to come. Metals gave humanity strength. Empires gave humanity scale. Together, they wove a world of kings and armies, roads and walls, wealth and conquest. This was not yet the modern world, but its outlines were beginning to form. The age of metals and empires was the age of ambition, when humanity learned not only to survive, not only to settle, but to dominate, to build on a scale larger than tribes, larger than cities, larger than rivers, civilizations that could stretch across horizons. And yet, even amid the rise of power, the heart of humanity remained the same. Families planting fields, artisans shaping beauty, storytellers sharing myths by firelight. The empires may have risen on iron and bronze, but they were sustained by people, ordinary men and women who carried the weight of history forward in their daily lives. From bronze to iron, from villages to empires, humanity had entered a new age, an age where fire and metal reshaped destiny, where kingdoms rose and fell, where ambition reached ever higher. And though the empires of this time would one day crumble into ruins, their legacies would endure, in roads, in laws, in philosophies, in the very metals that still shape our world today. The story of humanity was no longer just about survival. It was about power, invention, and the forging of civilizations in the fire of ambition. Empires had risen on iron and bronze, their armies marching across continents, their rulers carving their names into stone. But even the sharpest blade cannot shape the soul of humanity. Alongside the noise of conquest, a quieter revolution began. A revolution not of weapons, but of thought. For the first time in history, entire cultures turned inward, asking questions about life, about the cosmos, about morality, and about the laws that govern the world. This was the age of philosophy and science, when human beings began to seek not only power, but wisdom. In the eastern valleys of the Yellow River, in the forests and fields of India, and in the sunlit cities of Greece, three great traditions emerged, each carrying its own vision of truth. Though separated by distance, these worlds were united by the same human impulse, the desire to understand. In China, the collapse of old dynasties left people searching for order. From this need arose the teachings of Confucius, a humble teacher who walked from state to state, carrying only his words. His message was simple yet profound, that harmony begins with family, that rulers must lead by virtue, and that society thrives when kindness, respect, and duty guide human hearts. His ideas were not about gods or empires, but about the everyday relationships that held life together. Over time, Confucian thought would shape generations, guiding emperors and farmers alike, becoming the very foundation of Chinese civilization. But Confucius was not the only voice. From the mountains came the whispers of Taoism, a philosophy that urged people to align themselves with the flow of nature. Where Confucius spoke of rules and order, the Taoists spoke of rivers, wind and the balance of opposites, yin and yang, light and dark, stillness and movement. They taught that true wisdom was found not in power or ambition, but in simplicity, humility, and harmony with the cosmos. And in the clash between these visions, structure on one side, spontaneity on the other, Chinese civilization found a balance that would last for centuries. Far to the west, on the plains of India, other seekers of wisdom looked not to social order, but to the mysteries of the soul. The sages of the Upanishads sat beneath banyan trees, meditating on the nature of existence. They asked, "What is the self? What is the eternal reality behind all things?" From their reflections came the concept of Brahman, the infinite spirit, and Atman, the inner self, a recognition that the divine and the human are deeply connected. From these roots grew Hinduism, with its vast pantheon of gods and its timeless cycles of rebirth. In the 6th century BCE, new teachers emerged, the Buddha in India and Mahavira in the Jain tradition, who turned their focus inward, seeking release from suffering. The Buddha, once a prince named Siddhartha, left behind his palace to sit in silence beneath a tree. There he discovered the Four Noble Truths, a path to enlightenment through compassion, mindfulness, and the letting go of desire. His teachings spread like fire across Asia, reshaping cultures from Sri Lanka to China to Japan. Where China sought harmony in society, India sought liberation of the soul. And while these traditions grew, another world was asking questions of its own. On the rocky shores of Greece, philosophers gathered in marketplaces and under olive trees, daring to question everything. Thales looked to the stars and waters, asking what substance lies at the root of all things. Pythagoras found harmony in numbers, believing that the universe itself was a kind of music. Heraclitus spoke of fire and change, declaring that nothing ever stays the same, that all life is in motion. But it was Socrates who gave philosophy its heartbeat. He asked simple questions of his fellow Athenians. What is justice? What is courage? What does it mean to live a good life? His questions were relentless, not to win arguments, but to peel away illusions and reveal truth. Though he was condemned to death for his ideas, his method of inquiry, dialogue, questioning, reflection, would shape philosophy for millennia. Plato, his student, carried the torch, building a vision of a world beyond the senses, a realm of perfect forms and ideals. And Aristotle, Plato's student, turned his gaze to the natural world, observing plants, animals, politics, and ethics. He believed knowledge could be built step by step, through careful study and logic, laying the foundation for what we now call science. These traditions, Chinese, Indian, Greek, each offered their own answers, yet they shared something deeper, a belief that human beings could use reason, reflection, and observation to reach beyond survival, beyond empire, to grasp truth itself. For the first time, humanity began to see patterns that stretched across time and space. The stars above, once only the backdrop of myth, became subjects of study. Farmers had always watched the sky for seasons, but now thinkers mapped the heavens, seeking to measure their movements. The human body, once a mystery, became a subject of medicine, with early physicians experimenting, diagnosing, and searching for cures. Even in mathematics and geometry, humanity glimpsed order in the chaos, rules that could describe the very shape of the world. Yet these were not merely abstract ideas. Philosophy and science changed the way people lived. In Greece, democratic debates drew on philosophical arguments about justice and equality. In India, the teachings of the Buddha spread compassion, creating communities devoted to peace. In China, Confucian ideals guided emperors in ruling with virtue, or at least in pretending to. Thought itself had become a force, as powerful as armies, as enduring as stone. And as ideas crossed borders, they mingled and grew. Silk roads carried not only spices and goods, but philosophies and sciences, spreading wisdom from one civilization to another. Greek texts would one day reach the Islamic world, where scholars translated and preserved them. Indian numerals would travel across continents, becoming the foundation of modern mathematics. Chinese innovations, guided by their philosophies, would inspire generations to come. This was the age when humanity lifted its gaze from the soil and the sword to the stars, to the soul, to the patterns of nature. Empires might rise and fall, but ideas could outlast them all. A thought spoken by a teacher in a crowded market, or whispered beneath a tree, could echo through millennia, shaping worlds yet unborn. The fire of the forge had given us weapons. The fire of thought now gave us wisdom. And in that wisdom lay the seeds of the future: science, philosophy, and the human longing to know not just how to live, but why. Long before writing and reason could fully explain the world, human beings turned to stories. When lightning cracked across the sky, when the sun sank and returned, when the earth trembled and rivers flooded their banks, people did not see accidents of nature. They saw the hands of unseen forces, gods, spirits, ancestors, powers greater than themselves. And so, from the earliest flicker of campfire tales to the soaring temples of great civilizations, belief systems became the invisible thread weaving communities together. Religion and myth were not separate from daily life. They were life. They explained the mysteries of birth and death, the rhythms of the seasons, the order of the stars. They told people where they came from and where they might go after death. But above all, they bound societies together, giving shared purpose, shared rules, and shared dreams. In Mesopotamia, the world's first cities rose beneath the watchful eyes of towering ziggurats, stepped temples that reached toward the heavens. Here, people believed that gods governed every aspect of life. Enlil, the god of air; Inanna, goddess of love and war; and Marduk, who battled chaos to create the world. The great epic of Gilgamesh told not only of a king's adventures, but of humanity's longing for immortality, for meaning beyond the fleeting span of life. These myths shaped laws, kingship, and even the way people saw nature itself, not as random, but as the stage of divine will. Farther along the Nile, Egypt became a civilization built on myth. The sun god Ra sailed his boat across the sky each day, descending into the underworld each night, only to rise again. Osiris, the lord of the dead, promised eternal life to those who lived justly, while his wife Isis embodied devotion and magic. Pharaohs ruled not merely as kings, but as living gods, their power sanctified by the myths that tied earth to heaven. Even the pyramids were not just tombs. They were stairways to eternity, stone prayers rising from the desert toward the stars. To the east in India, stories unfolded on cosmic scales. The hymns of the Rigveda sang of gods like Agni, the fire, and Indra, the storm-bringer. Later, vast epics like the Mahabharata and the Ramayana wove together tales of heroes, dharma, and cosmic battles between good and evil. These stories were not only entertainment. They were moral guides, teaching people how to live, how to act with honor, and how to accept the endless cycles of birth, death, and rebirth. In China, too, myths and beliefs shaped identity. Ancient legends told of the Yellow Emperor, the sage king who taught people agriculture, medicine, and order. Heaven itself was seen as a great mandate, granting rulers legitimacy, but also demanding virtue. If a dynasty failed, if corruption spread or famine struck, it was said that heaven had withdrawn its favor, justifying rebellion and renewal. The mandate of heaven was more than a belief. It was the rhythm of Chinese history, a divine law that rose and fell with each dynasty. Across the seas in Greece, myth sang through poetry and drama. Zeus hurled thunderbolts from Olympus, Athena guided heroes with wisdom, and Poseidon shook the seas. These gods were mighty, yet deeply human in their emotions, jealous, loving, vengeful, proud. Their stories explained not just the cosmos, but the flaws and virtues of humanity itself. And from these myths grew rituals, temples, and festivals that united cities and gave identity to entire peoples. Religion and myth did more than offer stories. They gave structure to society. Sacred laws dictated how people should act, what foods to eat, when to rest, whom to marry. Temples and priests held knowledge, preserving writing, astronomy, and medicine. Myths justified rulers, turning kings into sons of heaven or chosen of the gods. They created community, binding strangers through shared rituals, shared sacrifices, shared prayers whispered in the dark. But beliefs also shaped morality. In the Middle East, new faiths emerged with powerful visions of justice and law. Judaism taught of a single God who demanded righteousness and compassion, who made a covenant with his people. The Ten Commandments carved moral rules into stone, guiding not only worship, but daily life. From this root would one day grow Christianity and Islam, religions that spread across continents, reshaping history through their teachings of faith, mercy, and devotion. Religion also gave people courage in the face of death. To the Egyptians, the afterlife was a paradise awaiting the worthy. To the Hindus, rebirth offered another chance to walk the path of truth. To the Greeks, the underworld offered shadows of what once was, a reminder of the fleeting beauty of mortal life. Belief made the unbearable bearable, giving hope where none might otherwise exist. Yet myths were never only about gods. They were also mirrors of human fears and desires. The flood myths that appear across cultures, from Mesopotamia to India to the Americas, spoke of chaos and renewal, destruction and rebirth. Tales of trickster gods reminded people that wit could outsmart strength. Stories of heroes and monsters revealed our deepest struggles, against nature, against fate, against the darkness within ourselves. And though each culture told different tales, their myths often carried the same themes: creation out of chaos, the battle between light and dark, the search for immortality, the hope for justice. These universal stories show that while people may be separated by oceans and mountains, the questions they ask, and the stories they tell, are astonishingly alike. Religion and myth became the bedrock of civilizations. They shaped art, law, music, and identity. They inspired temples, cathedrals, and mosques that still tower above us, whispers of ancient prayers carved into stone. They guided armies, crowned kings, comforted peasants, and inspired saints. In every corner of the world, belief gave humanity not just survival, but meaning. And yet, like all things, belief itself evolved. Old gods gave way to new, myths transformed, religions merged and spread. But the need that created them, the longing to explain, to belong, to find hope, has never faded. Even today, in a world of science and technology, Stories of faith and myth continue to shape lives, binding billions in shared purpose. The age of philosophy had asked, "What is truth?" The age of myth and religion asked, "What is meaning?" Together, they carried humanity forward, not only as builders of empires, but as seekers of the eternal. For thousands of years, the pace of human life had remained steady. Farmers sowed their seeds with wooden plows, merchants crossed the seas by sail, and artisans worked with their hands in quiet workshops. Days were marked by the rising and setting of the sun, and progress came slowly, one generation at a time. But then, in the late 18th century, something began to change. In the rolling green fields of Britain, a new kind of power stirred. Not the power of kings or empires, but the power of machines. It was a revolution unlike any before, not fought with swords or iron armies, but with coal, steam, and steel. The Industrial Revolution had begun, and humanity would never be the same. At its heart was the harnessing of steam. For centuries, people had burned wood or coal for heat, but now inventors discovered that boiling water could drive pistons and wheels. Steam engines turned water pumps, hauled heavy loads, and eventually powered trains that sped across the countryside faster than any horse could run. For the first time, human movement was no longer bound by muscle or wind. Steam became the new heartbeat of progress. Factories rose where fields once stood. Vast brick buildings housed rows of clattering machines, spinning cotton, weaving cloth, hammering metal. Work that once took days by hand could now be done in hours. Production soared, and so too did the demand for labor. Men, women, and even children poured into cities, leaving behind villages that had been home for countless generations. Cities swelled almost overnight. Smoke rose from chimneys, darkening the skies. Streets grew crowded, filled with carts, horses, and the constant hum of industry. For many, the city offered new opportunities, steady wages, the chance to rise from poverty, the thrill of modern life. Yet it also brought hardship. Families crammed into small rooms, the air thick with soot, the water often foul. Disease spread quickly, and the rhythm of life was no longer guided by seasons, but by the relentless ticking of factory clocks. Still, progress marched on. With machines to weave and spin, clothes became cheaper and more abundant. With steam engines, goods could be shipped faster than ever before. Railroads stitched nations together, linking coasts, villages, and distant towns into one vast network of trade and travel. What once felt like a distant land could now be reached in days instead of months. The world, it seemed, was shrinking. And as industry grew, so did invention. The telegraph carried messages across wires in moments, where letters had once taken weeks. Electricity began to light the streets, pushing back the night. Medicine, too, advanced. Doctors studied disease, developed vaccines, and discovered anesthesia, easing pain where once there had been none. Science and industry walked hand in hand, each pushing the other forward into the unknown. The Industrial Revolution was not just about machines, it was about transformation. Work itself changed. In villages, a weaver had once crafted cloth from start to finish, but in factories, a worker might spend years tending only a single part of the process. One thread, one gear, one motion repeated endlessly. The age of craftsmanship gave way to the age of specialization. It was efficient, but it was also dehumanizing, as many felt themselves becoming cogs in the very machines they served. Yet the revolution also sparked dreams. Railroads carried not only coal and cloth, but ideas of freedom, of reform, of change. Newspapers spread knowledge quickly, stirring movements for workers' rights, women's suffrage, and the abolition of slavery. Factories produced wealth on a scale never seen before, and with that wealth came both greed and generosity. Fortunes amassed by industrialists, but also schools, hospitals, and new opportunities funded by progress. Imagine standing on the platform of a 19th century train station. The air is filled with the hiss of steam, the smell of coal, the rumble of iron wheels. A train pulls in, sleek and powerful, its whistle echoing across the city. Crowds gather, marveling at the speed, the possibility, the sheer wonder of it all. For those who had never traveled more than a few miles from home, the train was not just transport. It was liberation. Medicine, too, transformed lives. Edward Jenner's smallpox vaccine saved millions, proving that science could not only explain the world, but protect it. Hospitals, once places of fear, began to modernize, embracing hygiene and new practices. Life expectancy slowly crept upward, and though disease and hardship remained, hope was stronger than ever before. But progress came with shadows. Factories demanded endless coal, and landscapes once green grew black with smoke. Rivers ran thick with dye and waste. Children worked long hours in dangerous mills, their small hands mending threads beneath whirring machines. Inequality deepened. Wealth flowed to the factory owners, while workers fought simply to survive. The revolution that promised abundance also demanded sacrifice. And yet, despite these struggles, humanity pressed forward. The Industrial Revolution lit the path to modernity. It gave us engines, electricity, medicine, and communication. It taught us that human ingenuity, when paired with machines, could change the very fabric of life. The quiet rhythms of the old world had given way to the roar of locomotives, the hum of factories, the pulse of progress. For the first time, humanity had stepped onto a path of constant acceleration, where each invention sparked another, where each breakthrough led to more. The Industrial Revolution was not just a moment in history, it was the turning point, the doorway into the modern age. And though it brought hardship, though it filled skies with smoke and streets with struggle, it also revealed something extraordinary, that human beings could transform not only themselves, but the very world around them. From fields to factories, from silence to steam, from candlelight to electricity, the Industrial Revolution carried us into a new chapter of our long story, a chapter still echoing in the world we live in today. The steam and smoke of the Industrial Revolution had transformed villages into cities, horses into locomotives, candles into electric light. Humanity had stepped onto a road of accelerating invention, a road that would carry us into the modern world, where every decade seemed to bring miracles once thought impossible. Electricity became the invisible river powering the new age. Streets that had once fallen silent at dusk now glowed with lamps, their golden light stretching into the night. Homes filled with new machines, electric stoves, phonographs, radios, each invention changing the rhythm of daily life. The flick of a switch replaced the lighting of a candle. The crackle of a radio carried voices across entire nations. It was as if humanity had discovered a new kind of fire, one that could flow through wires, lighting not only rooms, but imaginations. Cars soon rolled onto city streets, their engines growling where horses once trotted. At first, they were strange contraptions, noisy, unreliable, toys for the wealthy. But quickly they multiplied, giving ordinary people the power to travel farther and faster than ever before. Roads stretched across continents, stitching together towns and cities. The world grew smaller, more connected, and life itself began to move at the speed of wheels. Above those roads, another dream took flight. For centuries, people had watched birds with envy, longing to touch the sky. Then, in 1903, the Wright brothers lifted their fragile plane into the air for a few short seconds, and the impossible became real. Within a generation, airplanes crossed oceans, carrying mail, cargo, and eventually passengers. What once took months by sea could now be done in hours. Humanity had claimed the skies, and the horizon itself no longer seemed a limit. The inventions came in waves, each building on the last. Telegraphs gave way to telephones, telephones to radios, radios to televisions. A family in one corner of the world could now hear the same song, the same news, as millions of others. Information no longer traveled by horse or ship. It leapt across wires, invisible yet unstoppable. For the first time, humanity's voice could reach across the globe. But with each leap forward came new challenges. The same machines that powered factories could build weapons. The same airplanes that carried passengers could drop bombs. The same chemistry that created medicine could also create poison gas. Technology was a double-edged sword, carrying within it both hope and destruction. This truth became clear in the 20th century, when the world was plunged into wars of a scale never before seen. The First World War erupted in 1914, a storm born from rival empires, tangled alliances, and long-simmering tensions. Millions of soldiers marched with iron discipline, expecting glory. But they found mud, trenches, and endless death. Machine guns cut down charges in seconds. Poison gas drifted across the fields, burning lungs and blinding eyes. Artillery thundered day and night, reducing landscapes to shattered wastelands. By the time it ended, more than 15 million lives had been lost, and the old empires of Europe lay broken. The world had hoped it was the war to end all wars. But only 2 decades later, conflict returned, even more devastating than before. The Second World War began in 1939, fueled by tyranny, expansion, and hatred. Entire nations were drawn into the struggle, from Europe to Asia, from Africa to the Pacific. Cities burned, oceans churned with battle, and millions of soldiers and civilians alike were swept into the tide of destruction. New horrors emerged: concentration camps, genocide, and weapons of mass destruction. By 1945, the war had claimed the lives of more than 70 million people. It was in this war that humanity unlocked the most terrible power of all, the atom. In the skies above Hiroshima and Nagasaki, atomic bombs unleashed destruction unlike anything seen before. Entire cities reduced to ash in moments. The mushroom clouds rising into the air were more than weapons. They were warnings, reminders that human invention had reached a point where it could destroy the very world it had built. And yet, even in the ashes of war, seeds of unity began to grow. Nations that had once been enemies came together, vowing to prevent such tragedy from happening again. In 1945, the United Nations was born, a gathering place for countries to seek peace through dialogue rather than violence. The idea was simple yet revolutionary, that cooperation, not conquest, must guide the future. The wars had shown the worst of humanity, but they had also sparked some of its greatest advances. Radar, jet engines, antibiotics, rocketry, and computing all accelerated under the pressures of conflict. Once the wars ended, these technologies spilled into everyday life, reshaping how people traveled, healed, and communicated. From devastation emerged progress, though always shadowed by the memory of what had been lost. In the years that followed, the world changed rapidly. Airplanes became common, carrying families across continents for holidays or work. Cars filled highways, connecting suburbs to cities. Televisions brought moving images into homes, turning distant events into shared experiences. The telephone rang across oceans, shrinking the globe once more. And above all of this, humanity looked upward, beyond the skies, toward the stars. Rockets, once built for war, were turned toward exploration. In 1961, Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. Just 8 years later, Neil Armstrong set foot on the moon. His words carried live to millions watching around the world. For the first time in history, humanity had left its home planet, looking back at Earth as a fragile blue sphere floating in the vastness of space. It was a moment of wonder, but also of perspective. The wars had divided the world, but from space, there were no borders, no nations, only one planet, shared by all. The modern human era was, and still is, a paradox. It is an age of astonishing progress: electricity, medicine, transportation, communication, yet also an age of peril, where the very tools we create can threaten our survival. It is an age of global connection, where a message can cross oceans in an instant, but also an age of division, where nations still struggle with old wounds and new rivalries. Yet through all of it, humanity endures. We adapt, we create, we dream. The same curiosity that lifted our ancestors from the trees, that guided them across continents, that inspired them to paint caves and forge empires, it still beats within us. In every light bulb, every airplane, every whispered call across the phone, we see the story of a species that refuses to stand still, always reaching for more. The wars reminded us of our capacity for destruction, but the progress that followed reminded us of our capacity for unity, for wonder, for hope. The story of modern humanity is not yet finished. It continues with every invention, every cooperation, every step we take toward a future we are still imagining together. The 20th century closed with a new kind of revolution, not of steam or steel or fire, but of information. Where once humans had harnessed stone, bronze, and electricity, now we turn to something invisible, the power of ones and zeros, of digital codes whispering through circuits. It was the beginning of the digital age. At first, computers were vast machines, the size of entire rooms, humming and clattering with blinking lights. They were tools for governments, scientists, and armies, performing calculations that no human mind could manage in time. But soon, these machines grew smaller, faster, and more powerful. The microchip, a tiny square of silicon, condensed unimaginable processing power into something that could fit in the palm of a hand. With it, the world began to change again. Computers slipped from laboratories into offices, then from offices into homes, and finally into pockets. What once filled a warehouse could now rest in the back of a school bag or on the corner of a desk. People typed letters not on paper but on glowing screens. They stored libraries not on shelves, but on disks smaller than a hand. A single computer could hold more knowledge than entire civilizations of the past. Humanity had built a new kind of mind, one that could think in lightning speed and perfect memory. And then came the internet, the invisible web binding these computers together. At first, it was just lines of text, scientists and enthusiasts sharing messages across cables. But like fire spreading through dry grass, it grew and grew until it touched every part of life. With a click, you could see the headlines of distant countries, the words of strangers, the pictures of faraway lands. Borders that had once seemed vast now faded, replaced by a global conversation. The human story had always been about connection, from language to trade to cities. But now, connection reached across oceans instantly, threading together billions of lives in a single digital fabric. With this connection came new wonders. Voices that might once have been silenced could now be heard. Families separated by continents could speak face to face through screens. Students in small villages could learn from teachers thousands of miles away. Knowledge, once locked in libraries or guarded by the wealthy, spread freely, available to anyone with a signal. The dream of a truly global society, long imagined, was unfolding in real time. But as always, progress carried shadows. The same web that spread wisdom also spread lies. The same devices that united people also isolated them, glowing screens replacing conversations around tables. Privacy, once taken for granted, became fragile as every click and search left footprints. The digital age opened possibilities as vast as the stars, but also questions about how wisely we would walk this path. And now, in the 21st century, we stand at the edge of something even greater. Artificial intelligence, once the stuff of stories and speculation, has begun to take form. Machines that not only calculate, but also learn. Programs that recognize faces, translate languages, compose music, even write words like these. AI is not human, but in its own way, it reflects us, our patterns, our logic, our imagination. It is as if humanity has created a mirror, not of glass and silver, but of code and data. And through it, we glimpse both our brilliance and our fragility. The world is more connected now than ever before. Planes cross continents in hours. Satellites orbit above, sending signals for navigation and communication. A voice spoken in one corner of the earth can be heard instantly on the other side. Economies, cultures, and ideas flow together in an endless exchange. This is globalization, humanity woven into one network, one system, one fragile but extraordinary whole. And yet, the story does not end here. It cannot, for evolution is never finished. It is a river, always flowing, always reshaping the landscape ahead. So we look forward into the unknown. What will the next chapter of human evolution be? Some say it will be written in the stars. The same curiosity that led our ancestors to leave the forests, to cross deserts and oceans, now points us toward space. Already machines have landed on Mars, rovers tracing paths through alien dust. Telescopes peer into galaxies far beyond imagination. Astronauts live for months in orbit, looking down at the fragile Earth below. One day, perhaps, humans will build homes on other planets, carrying with them the fire that began so long ago. Colonies beneath domes, ships drifting between stars. The dream of exploration has always burned within us, and it may yet carry us into the cosmos. Others believe our future lies within ourselves, written in the language of DNA. Genetics has revealed the code of life, the blueprint that shapes our bodies and minds. Already scientists edit this code, repairing flaws, curing diseases, even considering the possibility of reshaping human potential. It raises profound questions. If we can design ourselves, what does it mean to be human? If we can extend our lives, enhance our intelligence, or even merge with machines, are we still the same species that once painted caves and built pyramids? And perhaps the greatest question of all, what does it mean to be human in a world where the boundaries blur, between flesh and metal, between earth and space, between what we are and what we might become? The story of human evolution has always been one of transformation. From small primates in the trees to toolmakers, from wanderers to builders, from villagers to citizens of nations. We have adapted, struggled, created, and dreamed. Each age has brought challenges. Each age has brought wonders. And now, we stand once again at the threshold of something new, with choices as vast as the universe itself. Will we use our tools to divide or to unite? To destroy or to heal? To remain bound by our past or to step boldly into futures unimagined? As the story continues, one truth remains constant. Humanity is not defined by where we began, nor by what we have built, but by our endless journey forward. The same fire that once lit the darkness of caves still burns, now in circuits, in rockets, in dreams of tomorrow. And so, as we look ahead, we carry with us the memory of every ancestor who walked, who struggled, who dreamed before us. Their story is our story, the story of human evolution. And it is a story still being written, with each heartbeat, each invention, each step into the unknown.